I love Metroid. Like, I really, really love Metroid. It has always been not just my favourite Nintendo series, not just even my favourite game series, it's just kind of my favourite series, it's my favourite thing. Now, I have been meaning to talk about these games on here for a while. I think before the channel even started. Like, I think I've been procrastinating on this for over 11 years now. Because I've never really heard anybody quite capture this series the way that I see it. Both a lot of the good points that I think go overlooked, but also some of its problems. Which isn't to say that I think everybody else is an idiot, it's just, you know, I wanted to do it my way. So I thought it was high time that I did my own video retrospective. I'm going to be going through the series game by game in release order, talking about the design, talking about the evolution of the series, and most importantly, I'm going to be talking about what each game means to me. Because, you know, there's a lot to talk about here. This is a series that includes both my favourite game of all time, but also probably my least favourite game of all time. It's a complicated relationship. We fight like cat and dog, but the sex is incredible. Now, it has never been Nintendo... I don't know what that means. It's never been Nintendo's most popular series, and I think that there are a lot of good reasons for that. But to me, it really is kinda special. It really is sorta legendary. Metroid 1 was thrown together in about 3 months. So this game was developed by Nintendo R&D 1. Not Nintendo EAD, not the Mario and Zelda guys, right? This wasn't the team that you would think of as being typically Nintendo, with captured princesses and meticulous, extremely polished design and all that. R&D 1 were instead under the stewardship of Gunpei Yokoi. Now this here was the man that kind of made Nintendo what it is. He created the Game & Watch, the machine that kind of brought them out of financial dire straits. He was the man that influenced Nintendo's entire design philosophy. He was the man that mentored Miyamoto. In keeping with that pedigree, these guys were a lot more experimental, but they were also a bit sloppier. These were the guys behind Ice Climber, Balloon Fight, and Wrecking Crew, those sorts of games. Metroid, specifically, was started by 2 of R&D 1's rookies. That was Hirofumi Matsuoka and Hiroji Kiyotake. Now, these guys had never actually made a game before, but they were encouraged by Yokoi, who told them, if you can draw, you can make games. I don't know, man, I think that's a really nice thought. I think that's really inspiring. So what they would do is they would create the sprites and the specifications, and then they would send those out to intelligence systems for programming. After about 10 months of this game still hadn't come together. All of a sudden, the rest of the team had to pile in and cobble this into an actual game with about 3 months left to deadline. And if you've played Metroid 1, a lot of stuff is now beginning to make sense. Before we get to any of that though, let's go ahead and get some backstory. The instruction booklets were always a really big part of the Metroid experience for me. They were always packed with loads of useful information and background detail. I used to pore over these as a kid. Even in this first one, even in this most primitive form, there are still 6 pages of backstory before anything else. Even Zelda, which had a lot more time and effort put into its instruction booklet, only had 2 pages of backstory. One wee detail here is that it calls Samus and the other bounty hunters Space Hunters, which was actually the game's working title. That detail's important. Samus is usually called a bounty hunter, right? But there seem to be some crossed wires about that. She's not actually a bounty hunter. She doesn't bring in bad guys for cash. As Sakamoto puts it, bounty hunter is not the defining characteristic of Samus Aran. Me neither, I usually find them next to the twigs. Either way, I'm going to keep calling her a bounty hunter because, well, that's what the games call her as well, and plus I think it sounds better. But yes, it is important to note that she isn't really your typical bounty hunter. Also, it keeps calling Samus him. Man, I'm not even going to pretend, all of us already know. Now this is apparently intentional. The Japanese manual uses male pronouns as well, even though it would have been very easy for them, apparently, to just keep it neutral. With about 40 years of hindsight, I do think that this is a wee bit of a missed opportunity, because if they had managed to keep it neutral, then they would have preyed on your assumptions rather than outright lie to you. The rest of the manual is just filled up with information about the enemies and power-ups. Same. What's interesting though is that none of these enemies seem to be the space pirates. The space pirates don't actually make an appearance in this game. They're shown to be these shadowy figures in the manual, or, you know, at least that's what I'm guessing based on the peg leg. Like, the manual describes the pirates' eerie followers who lie in wait around every corner, but everything else suggests that they're just wildlife. It's details like Zebes being described as a natural fortress, the fact that none of the enemies are actually identified as being a space pirate. Even Ridley here isn't that pirate leader that we've all come to know, but he's a Bessian native. He's being controlled by Mother Brain. It's a bit of a weird choice, isn't it? Either way, I kinda dig it. Now, the Morph Ball has a different name in this game. It's called the Maru Mari. From my very, very limited understanding of Japanese, Maru Maru is a verb that means curling into a ball, whereas Maru Mari is the gerund form of that verb. It's kinda like swimming. It's the form that makes that verb act as a noun. So in Japanese, Maru Mari would be understood as curling into a ball. But in English, of course, we don't understand that, so it just ends up sounding like a mystical alien artifact. Honestly, it's not really my favourite example of the game doing this, and besides which, I am so used to calling it the Morph Ball at this point that, yeah, I just keep calling it the Morph Ball. Hopefully, everybody's okay with that. Now, the instructions are also pretty insistent that you draw your own map and also try to finish the game quickly. It's quite specific and quite focused on that, and I don't think that that should be overlooked. That's going to be quite important later on. Look at Samus's mad wee turkey walk, man. She was supposed to have more frames of animation. She would even have had different sprites depending on if she was facing left or right. This is one of the problems with having an asymmetrical character in a 2D game, right? Is you kind of double your workload. But they were told to cut back for whatever reason, and this is what we're left with. Now, I say for whatever reason because, according to Kiyotake, these sprites were removed for memory limitations. But they're actually still in the game's ROM. I mean, he could, of course, have been talking about RAM, but what's RAM, you say? Man, I have no idea. I've not got the first clue about game development. I don't know anything about the NES architecture. I barely understand how to put my bloody trousers on in the morning. Don't ask me. Interestingly enough, one of these alternative sprites was used for the NES version's cover, which is a flagrant example of false advertising. Can't fucking believe it, man. Nintendo's scummy practices go all the way back to the 1980s. Of course, there is the other big example of technical limitations influencing the sprite's work. Apparently, the Morph Ball was created so they didn't have to animate Samus crawling. Now, I say apparently because I don't know where this is from. Like, look, okay, you go onto the wiki, and the wiki takes you to an unsourced IGN article. I believe it, but I can't tell you for certain. If anybody does have a source for this, please pop it below. I'd be very grateful. Anyway, speaking of which, walking right is a dead end. This is a tutorial, of course. This is teaching you two very important fundamentals. Think of this as the 1-1 of Metroid. Firstly, it's teaching you that you can go left. Now that might seem really stupid and obvious, of course, but the thing is that Metroid was straining against the standard that had been set by Super Mario Bros., an incredibly successful NES game in which you couldn't even scroll the screen left. You couldn't take it for granted that people would get that. The rivalry between the two teams actually defined a lot of Metroid's design, right down to Samus's movement. The reason that she stops dead when you let go of the D-pad was again to contrast Mario. Secondly, this segment is basically the entire game in microcosm. You've got that basic lock and key setup here of the obstacles, and then the power-ups that you need to overcome the obstacles. It's kind of like a bit of a carrot and stick approach, you know? You're being blocked with one hand and enticed with the other. This may seem like a patronisingly simple example right at the start, but it had a lot to teach. There's even another mini tutorial at the Morph Ball plinth. You can't get out of here without using it. This is, of course, quite similar to adventure games. It's quite similar to Zelda. The reason that I prefer Metroid, though, is that these power-ups become a part of Samus. These keys can be used on many locks. One item, many uses. Compare with Zelda, where some of the power-ups are simple, one-use solutions to a very specific puzzle. The meat is completely useless unless you're trying to get past this one room, while the missiles can be used to open doors and attack enemies. The raft does nothing outside of two very specific spots, whereas the ice beam can freeze most enemies and make them into platforms. It's more versatile because the item has a use beyond one specific situation. It's more persistent because the item can be used throughout the entire game. And it's just more fun, isn't it? Like, right on the face of it, it's more fun to freeze things and then blow them up with missiles. Like, are you honestly telling me that Gorilla puzzle wouldn't have been better if you'd just blown them up with a missile? Hasta la vista, baby! Now, none of this is to say that Zelda is bad. Don't get your knickers in a twist. I did like an hour-long video gushing about how much I love that game. But you can kind of see why I prefer this, right? Like, at least in principle. Exploration in Metroid is therefore very player-driven. It's very mechanical. There are no clues or hints. There is no text. This is what creates that sense of isolation. Now, obviously things like the pitch-black backgrounds and the really atmospheric soundtrack and the lack of NPCs to talk to, they bolster that feeling. But the backbone of it is the game itself. It's Samus versus Zebes. It's very satisfying. You could make an entire genre out of this feeling. So this game is considered to be the first Metroidvania. They had no time to add more features in that 3-month crunch, so that basic run and gun gameplay had to be expanded into a full game. The way that they did that was by having a big explorable map. So, in a weird sort of a way, when you really stop and think about it, this rushed development created an entire genre. Except it didn't, because we're not even really sure that Metroid is the first. You had Below the Root in 1984, and Brainbreaker in 1985 even had an armoured female protagonist. So it turns out Nintendo didn't even invent women. Honestly, I kinda hate the word Metroidvania. Originally it was used to refer to Castlevania games that fashioned themselves after Metroid. Your Simon's Quests, your Symphony of the Nights and what have you. The stuff that we now call Igavanias. See, now that makes sense in my head. It's not the name of a genre, it's just being used to distinguish between two different styles of game in this one series. But nowadays, it has come to mean the entire genre, which means that I now need to say stupid shite like Metroid is a Metroidvania? Shut up! Doom is a Doom clone. It also means, right, that if you've not played Metroid before, or, some specific Castlevania games, then this is not at all a helpful word. Alright, my man, what's this you're playing? Oh, a Metroidvania? Right, so what would I call it then? Well, first I think we need to actually define what it is, so let me ask you a trickier question. Is this even a genre in the first place? Now, personally I do think that it is, but I also think that a genre needs to be more than just a bracket of similarities. What is it that makes a Metroidvania a Metroidvania? Is it the map? Because that would mean that Metroid is not a Metroidvania. Does it have to be 2D? Because I think that would disqualify some exemplary games. Is it the item-based progression, perhaps? Because that starts to blur the line with action-adventure games. Is it just the vibes? Because then that's not really a genre, that's an inspiration. Look, I promise you, I'm not trying to be a twat. I'm not sat here like, you're an idiot actually. It's just that I've never been satisfied with the word Metroidvania. A lot of game discussion online is vibes based, when I think it is quite important to define your terms. I don't know why I'm trying to save face here, the damage is already done. Ken what? I'm going to double down. I'm coming for Souls-like next. That's not a genre, you fucks, they're just really good action RPGs! So, tentatively, let me define my terms. I think this genre is a hybrid of the platformer and the adventure game. From the platformer, it takes a focus on the interactions between the character and the terrain. And from the adventure game, it takes persistent character growth through power-ups that let you explore more of an interconnected world. What I think makes this so compelling, like what I think makes this genre work so well, is that it expands the focus of that interaction between the character and the terrain. You have the micro, which is the moment-to-moment platforming, but you've also got the macro, you've got the broader navigation to consider. As you get more power-ups, your relationship with the terrain completely changes. Ah, but hold on though, you might be saying, what about RPG mechanics? Yeah, those can come too. I mean, they are undeniably a massive part of this genre, even in those games that don't specifically use stat sheets. Personally, I'm more of a Metroid man myself, but the other half of this god-awful portmanteau is Castlevania. So, what would I call it? There have been many suggestions. In Japan it's called Search Action. Extremely OK Games, the developers of Celeste, said Exploration, which I was quite taken with. Now they're both really good, but my favourite suggestion came from Stuart Jipp, who said Mapformer. I think that's great because it captures both the platformer and the exploration angle of this genre. Like, I think if you went up to somebody that had never played Metroid before and you said Mapformer, I think it would give them an inkling, at the very least, of what this game is about. I know that it is quite self-indulgent, but to be honest with you, I will probably just end up using Mapformer throughout the rest of this series. You can leave your comment if you want, like, it only helps me out. Now, it might seem to you like I've just spent a lot of words reaching the exact same conclusion as everybody else, but it is important, I think, to argue with conviction that you remove ambiguity where you can. Even if you disagree with what I am saying, which is totally fine, at least you understand what it is that I am saying. You can understand that, for example, I don't think Super Mario 64 is a map-former. It lacks persistent character growth through power-ups. You can understand that I don't think Dark Souls 1 is a map-former. It lacks that focus on interactions between the character and the terrain. It's more about the interactions between the character and the enemies. You can understand that despite having persistent character growth and platforming elements, I don't think that Zelda 2 is a map-former. It lacks an interconnected world. Although, to be fair, I think you could probably convince me that it is one. This is what I mean, man. I am not the last word in this conversation, but I think you kind of understand what my part of this conversation is, right? Even if Metroid isn't the first of the map-formers, it is undeniably massively influential. It inspired a huge number of games, particularly indie games. And honestly, I really need to make the time to play more of them. If you've got any particular favourites or recommendations, then, leave them down below, please. Yep, I know about Hollow Knight. Another big strength of this genre is the balance that it strikes between structure and choice. Now, this might sound familiar to you if you've already watched my Pulitzer Prize winning Zelda 1 video, but Metroid does have a structure. Despite being this open, interconnected world, you can't just go anywhere. You have to get the missiles before you can get the long beam, the ice beam, or the bombs. You have to get either the high jump boots, or if you're particularly cheeky, the ice beam, before you can get the Varia suit. You have to get the bombs before you can explore most of Norfair, or before you can even reach Kraid. And you have to beat Kraid along with Ridley before you can reach Tourian. So while it does have a structure, you have choice. You have a lot of decisions to make within that structure. In fact, I think that you get to make more meaningful decisions than if you were given a complete open world. You interpret the information, and then you decide how you want to deal with it. When you get your first 5 missiles, which hatch do you open first? Do you go all the way back to the long beam? Or do you go for the bombs first? When you have those bombs, do you use them to scour the rest of Brinstar, or do you go straight down to Norfair? When you're already down in Norfair, do you go straight for Ridley, or do you double back and go for Kraid first? Now, those are really simplified examples. I'm kind of dumbing that down there so that I can fit it in a sentence, so that I can make a point. When you're actually playing the game, you are making far more numerous and far more complex choices at many more points throughout the game. At the same time, you're discovering your options as well, especially on a first playthrough, but also on subsequent playthroughs. There's always just a little bit more to discover. There's always a wee optimization or a wee hidden route. Now, this is often framed as linearity versus non-linearity, but I kinda resist that. I don't like that, because it frames them both as opposites, when I think that structure and choice are actually quite complementary. I think you need structure. I think that you need obstacles in order to give your choices meaning. You need the linearity that structure offers to create moments of interest, obstacles that aren't discretionary, obstacles that you can't just walk around. But you need the freedom and the choice that non-linearity offers you to give you agency in how you tackle these obstacles. Different games within this genre push and pull on structure and choice to create vastly different experiences. Some games are very structured, only letting you get optional power-ups out of order. Some games are instead very loose, letting the player express themselves, letting them explore at their own pace. Metroid 1's relative simplicity means it leans a lot more into player choice. The missiles and the bombs can be gotten very early, and both of those together blow the game wide open. If you know where you're going, you can get all of the major items really early. Ridley and Kraid still create structure, but getting to them is very player-driven, it's very freeform, and I like that a lot. Now, Metroid is a pretty cryptic game, but it does leave you clues. I said there that navigation was quite player-driven. The clues are quite mechanical in this first game. You're not going to find NPCs who'll give you hints. There is a language to these games, and you learn to speak that language the more that you play them. Like here, for example, you can guess that something is down here because you can see an enemy. You know, this is pretty big brain stuff. This is really elegant game Fucking hell. Yeah, okay, the game's kinda dogshit. It's got stiff controls, you can't crouch or shoot down. Sometimes bombs have to be in very specific places to destroy hidden blocks. The slowdown is abominable. The ice beam unfreezes enemies on a second shot, but sometimes that slowdown will make you do a double shot, so they just immediately unfreeze. Enemies will hit you as you're going through the doors. This is literally unavoidable at some points. There's a lot of sloppy enemy placement in general, to be honest. The screw attack will deactivate when you're near the ground, so it's well fiddly. Sometimes you cannot aim up in the air. It seems to be when you walk off a ledge, but it's inconsistent. I don't really get why it doesn't happen sometimes. The ball physics are wonky. They're a wee bit ambitious, I respect them, but they are wonky. And when you die or reset the game, you start with 30 health. Now, keep in mind that this is a game where you can get to 699 health. Unless you find an energy tank, you are going to be farming for ages. Oh my god, why did I do that? I'm going to book it. I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to go. I got it. We got it. We're fine. Will you relax? You're really stressing me out. It's bad, and it is bad in a really, really obvious way. But nevertheless, I'm going to put a wee pin in that for right now. All of this to say that, yeah, it's really rough, man. Like, look, I'm not about to sit here and tell you that you're wrong if you don't like it. Now, the screw attack is often thought of as one of Samus's final items, but funnily enough, it was actually one of the first items designed for the game. The idea was, again, to contrast Mario by crashing through enemies rather than avoiding them. You could make an entire franchise off that idea. Here's the secret sauce, right? I think that the screw attack is essential, not just for this game, not just for this series, but for this entire genre to work properly. Now, obviously, I don't mean for other games to just copy the screw attack, but I do think it is essential to have this kind of overpowered ability, an ability that lets you demolish enemies without even breaking stride. The reason being that this item makes backtracking a breeze rather than a pace breaker. As you can see, you can get the screw attack pretty early, but I'm not necessarily sure that you were supposed to. It's very well hidden, so I have to imagine that you weren't meant to find it this early, if at all. I actually kinda like this quality about Metroid 1. I kind of like that game knowledge is the deciding factor rather than power-ups. I'm glad you don't have to go to the opposite end of the map to get the bungus beam and then come back. You just have to discover that this is here. It does mean that the game is very short when you know what you're doing, but then again it was 1986. Having said that, I am going to hit you with a bit of a take here. I am going to put the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons. I quite like backtracking. You are returning to an old area with a new perspective because of your power-ups. It completely changes the feel of the level. You come back with more power-ups and you can open up more of the level. You get a more complete picture. This is how you sell the player on how much more experienced they are. You vary the difficulty. You have peaks and troughs. The player is going to have a much easier time here, and that's good pacing. Maybe this is one of the great strengths of this genre, is that it kind of paces itself. Despite how primitive it is, Metroid knew its own identity from the very first game. Atmosphere is an enormous part of its appeal. It was moodier than a lot of its contemporaries, again, to contrast Mario. The composer, Hirokazu Hip Tanaka, wanted to create a soundtrack that he described as a living entity, with the music and the sound effects blending together. Of course, you have that absolutely iconic title theme. Nah, I'm kidding. It's such a wonderful ambience, it really captures the loneliness of this game. That pulse for the bass line and that creepy melody. They're both at such opposite ends of the spectrum that it sounds kind of empty. You know, it sounds kind of hollow. Kinda like the planet Zebes. I'm just making stuff up now. But then you have this kind of wistful segment that sounds almost hopeful. It's absolutely iconic for a reason. It is so perfect for this game. There are many other excellent examples, of course, but one of the standouts is that ambient track that plays in the item and the lift rooms. A faltering, high-pitched alien noise with this fluttering heartbeat behind it. When you're in these rooms, you have nothing but this eerie track and the sound of Samus's footsteps. Like, footsteps in an NES game? Like, considering the limited sound hardware, like considering the lack of audio channels in the Famicom and NES, that must have been a very deliberate choice. Like, I think these guys knew exactly what this game's appeal was right from the very beginning. That contrast is also just really good pacing. There's something different about this place. You're anticipating something happening, even if you don't quite know what that's going to be. Sakamoto was always interested in representing the civilization of an undiscovered planet. He was the one that told Matsuoka to put stuff like the Artifactor statues in. And what a great design these guys have. It's so weird and unique. They seem kind of inspired by griffins in this first game. Peter, you can't be a Chozo statue in Planet SR388. Fuck off, Lois. Nah, but like griffins in mythology are guardian creatures. They are said to guard treasures, just like the Chozo statues. I think that's super cool. I also really love that they are holding that crystal ball. Like, even though this is supposed to be advanced technology, this gives them a kind of, like, a mystical, prophetic feel, you know? Like, later on, it would be sanctified in Metroid lore that the Chozo did indeed have the gift of prophecy. But Metroid 1 doesn't need to explain that in order to suggest it, just by having them hold that crystal ball. It's also a very pious pose, isn't it? As if they are praying to something. None of this is in my notes, I'm just off on one because I really like the Chozo statues. The pièce de résistance, though, the best part of these are the beam totems. These things are so cool. The beams are being held by these miniature totems of these creatures. Were these religious figures, or were these inspired by wildlife? It suggests a lot about the culture of the Chozo. Even the topography of Zebes is quite coherent. You've got Norfair below, which is a volcanic area, and then as it rises to the surface it cools and becomes Brinstar, a rocky area. Metal tiles signal power-ups. Even if Metroid doesn't have the lore ironed out at this early stage, there is the instinctive understanding that these parts have to be different. Why else would the missiles be here? It's also got a more complex setting than a lot of other Nintendo games, especially at the time. It's not just an evil wizard capturing a princess. There are loads of different factions and moving parts. You've got the Federation, the Pirates, the Chozo, the Metroids, the Hunters. A lot of this is lifted from Alien, as you will probably know. The similarities are obvious. You've got these ancient alien super civilizations that nevertheless seem to have gone extinct under mysterious circumstances. You've got this incredibly powerful and violent alien life form that is being used as a biological weapon. You know, stuff like that. It's just that the factions are switched to remove ambiguity. Samus is unquestionably on the good guy's side. At least for now. Even minor details have a lot of parallels. Ridley is probably named after Ridley Scott, there's a malevolent computer called Mother, and there's an HR Giger biomechanical vibe to a lot of the backgrounds. Now, at one stage during the writing of this video, I had another reference here. I had the fact that SR388 was almost certainly a reference to LV426, the moon where the facehuggers were found in the first Alien. But while I was making the video, like literally at one point while I was recording footage, I was struck by a wayward thought. Was it ever actually called LV426 in that first Alien movie? So I looked it up and indeed no, it was only ever named in Aliens, which came out in July 1986. Now okay, that is still technically before Metroid, so it's possible that they snuck in this reference at the very last second. Except that Aliens didn't come out in Japan until August 30th, 1986. Metroid came out August 6th. It turns out that Kiyotake was a big bikehead, and he named the planet SR388 after the Yamaha SR400 engine, which actually only got 388 cc's. So yeah, it turns out that this really was just a coincidence. But it goes to show you, Metroid was never just an Alien tribute act. It had loads of other influences besides. There's this really great video by Critical Kate going over a lot of Metroid's potential influences. The one that I found really convincing and really interesting was the similarities with Space Cobra. Now I find all of this really interesting, of course I do, right? But one thing I think is worth stating is that these were creative guys. Like, If that whole LV426 fiasco is anything to go by, Metroid has its own unique ideas. We're coming up on another one of Metroid's wonky little tricks here. This lava is actually fake, you can go through it. But there are no clues, no hints, you just have to know that you can jump in this lava safely. But not this lava though, because then you can't bloody get out and you end up at 11 health. All of this to go and get the wave beam, only to learn that you've actually blocked yourself from getting out of certain rooms. Again, it's a bit weird, it's a bit wonky, it's a bit sloppy. Of course, Metroid wasn't designed for the NES, it was made for the Famicom disk system first. The Famicom is the Japanese name for the NES, the Famicom disk system is a disk add-on that was never released worldwide. The biggest difference between these two versions of the game is the save system. The Famicom disk system used disks. Duh. So it could actually save to hardware, whereas the NES had to use a password system. Now, funnily enough, the Metroid cartridge does actually have room for a save battery, just like the one that Zelda uses. This has, of course, led to a lot of speculation about why that battery isn't there. Metroid actually released in America the week before Zelda, which is kinda peculiar to me for some reason, but either way, it has been suggested that all of the batteries went to Zelda instead, went to the surer bet. Now I have to stress that that is speculation, I can't find any first-hand sources to back that up, but you know, it's within the realms of possibility. So you can get your password, or save your game if you're playing the Japanese version, by either dying, or by pausing and then pressing up and A on a second controller. It was the 1980s, man, it was the Wild West. The password system, of course, opened the game up to a couple of pretty iconic cheats. Justin Bailey and then a bunch of dashes starts you with a lot of endgame items while Samus is also not wearing her suit. Now this led to a lot of speculation about the meaning of the phrase Justin Bailey. One of the most popular ideas was that Samus was just in her Bailey. Bailey apparently being a slang term for a swimsuit or a leotard. It isn't. That is complete rubbish. Disappointing as it is, the real explanation seems to be that this is just a coincidence. Justin Bailey and then 12 dashes just so happens to be a really good password in Metroid. More intentional is Ne Sais Sword, or NAR password. This one actually changes the game, making you completely invincible and also giving you a combination ice and wave beam that is unavailable anywhere else. That would have been really handy a few minutes ago. Now again, this caused a lot of speculation. A lot of people wondered about the meaning of NAR or NAR. One popular theory was that it stood for North American Release, but the more likely explanation, in my opinion, is that it's short for Toru Naruhiko, the man who ported the game to the NES. While I've been blethering, I've been making my way up to get the Varia suit, which doubles defense. Varia is the other one of those Japanese names that made their way across to English. It's the one that I like a whole lot more. If you are familiar with how Japanese pronunciation works, you'll quickly figure out that this is supposed to be barrier. Unlike Maru Mari though, I'm really glad they kept this going forward. I really like the name Varia. It's like halfway between barrier and variation. Like the screw attack, the Varia suit is really well hidden. This causes a lot of consternation among a lot of people, like how the hell are you supposed to find this without a guide? But I think an important detail here is that unlike the missiles or the bombs or the morph ball, you don't actually have to get the Varia suit or the screw attack to finish the game. They make the game a lot easier of course, but they're not actually necessary. So I don't think this is cruel, I don't think that this is the designers being mean. Because you're going through the game, right? You're having a difficult time, you're really struggling with some of the bosses and enemies, and then you find out about these power-ups either through a guide or a friend or just by mucking about, and it's like a breath of fresh air, you know? Like, look how much easier this is now. I don't know, I kinda like it. I think it adds another layer of tension and release, you know? Like, maybe it's just me. The level design in Kraid's Lair is just rubbish. Best example I can think of is the 3 identical copy-pasted corridors at the top right of the map. These have absolutely nothing in them, and even worse if you choose to explore them, you're going to get hit going in and out of pretty much every door. It sucks, man. Now, I think that repeating corridors and dead ends are necessary to make this place feel like a maze. One of the advantages of not having a map is that you can do stuff like this. You can really misdirect the player. You can force them to have some confidence in their own navigation skills because they don't have any objective evidence that they haven't doubled back on themselves somehow. Now, this is perhaps not a problem with this segment in particular, but with the rest of the game. Maybe the rest of the game just isn't distinct enough for this to feel intentional. There was a lack of time and a lack of power to really flesh out the world. Maybe this is super avant-garde level design and I'm a pleb who just doesn't get it. Or maybe I'm just playing devil's advocate too hard and it really is just shit. If you defeat Kraid and you want to get back out, you have to contend with this tower of regenerating blocks. This takes absolutely ages, and all the while you are guessing the timing, and if you mistime it, you are going all the way back down. If, like me, you came in here without the ice beam, then you also have to go around this little loop to get out.
I'm back in the fucking building again!
Now, people call this Nintendo difficulty. They're always banging on about how old NES games are Nintendo hard. Except there's a giant difference between this and Zelda 1 or Mega Man. Those games are tight and precise. They take great care to work around their limitations. Metroid, on the other hand, is sloppy. I mean, of course it is. What with its production and whatnot. But the fun is still there. This basic formula is so good. It's still so much fun to go through this maze and unpick this knot. Part of that fun was creative. Before the internet, you would have to go through and draw your own map, just like it says in the manual. But that's just not something that you would do nowadays. People have already long since drawn a map and then uploaded it to the internet. So the question becomes, is it more authentic for me to experience this game as I would have back in the day, by going through it and drawing my own map as I go? Or is it actually more authentic for me to experience the game as I would nowadays, by just Googling it? Trick question, actually, because I already looked it up years ago. It is going to be impossible for me to recapture the feeling of playing this for the first time. A basic example is that very first missile rocket, which sits right in front of Norfair. A new player might collect this and then carry on and miss a ton of important items that they're probably going to need down in Norfair, and then come back later. But, having played it before, I already know to collect these missiles and then immediately do a 180. But I don't think that means the fun is gone. I played it a few times in a row for this video, and I found myself discovering more and more with each playthrough. I was discovering more about the map, and then I was putting that knowledge to use later on. We'll get to that when we get to Ridley. So you have to defeat the 2 mini-bosses, Ridley and Kraid, to gain access to the final area. So right at the start, these 2 are your main targets. You can beat Kraid by pumping him full of bombs. Even though you will lose health, I think this is the superior strategy because beams and missiles just get blocked by his spikes. Samus having such a limited arsenal means bombs become an option in a lot more fights. The most infamous example is, of course, the most basic enemy. Unless you have the wave beam, bombs are the only reliable way to hurt these guys. As for Kraid, he doesn't become vulnerable when his weak point is exposed, he doesn't have phases or anything. You just have to use whatever you have in whatever way you see fit. Either you use beams and missiles and you are constantly getting blocked, or you use your bombs and you're constantly taking damage as he shuffles back and forth. It's not great. None of the bosses are. There is a decoy here, a fake Kraid, who is supposed to throw you off, but who does a really shit job of it. For some reason, he is much more difficult to find than the actual Kraid. I don't think that I've ever found him before this playthrough, and even then, the reason that I did find him on this playthrough is because I was making a video on it. It's another patented Kraid's Lair misdirect that falls completely flat. So does he goes down to a single missile. Funnily enough though, unlike the real Kraid, he seems pretty resistant to bombs. I don't know if this is that they programmed Kraid to be weak to bombs, or if they programmed him to be weak to missiles, but yeah, either way, don't try bombing him. In fact, you might as well not even bother shooting a missile at him, just flip into him. That'll do the job. On the way to Ridley, we're going to stop off and retrieve the ice beam. Now this is easily one of Metroid's most iconic power-ups. I kinda take it for granted nowadays. Like, I'm so used to Metroid that I don't really think about the ice beam, but when you do think about the ice beam, it's really weird and unique and cool, isn't it? No pun intended. It's kind of like a counterpart to the bombs. The ice beam lets you go up and the bombs let you go down. Together they let you explore the entirety of the screen. This is another absolute classic Metroid power-up that came directly from the scramble to get the game finished. Apparently it was very easy for them to change the enemy's colour and collision behaviour. Now here's the thing, is I quite like the wave beam. I do think it's an odd way to let you hit grounded enemies, but it's quite fun, especially with its increased power. But it is an enormous liability, so I never bother picking it up. Again, unless I'm making a video on it. You physically cannot make progress in quite a few places, including, crucially, the end of the game, which I think is pretty important, unless you can freeze enemies. I think that most players who are even passingly familiar with this game will just skip the wave beam, and that seems like a waste. Ridley's Lair is a real bastard, but in a fun way that I actually really like. It's probably got, for my money, the best level design in the entire game. Here's my tier list. This room here is particularly mean. This tiny wee gap in the ceiling suggests that you're supposed to freeze an enemy and then bomb jump in there, but as much as I tried, I could never get this to happen. I think it might be, if not impossible, like unbelievably precise. In reality, that gap is a red herring, you're just supposed to do this. So you get through this and you're feeling pretty smart, you're feeling pretty good about yourself, and what does the game reward you with?
Oh, fucking yes!
That is so shitty and it's so unfair, and it ties into the unique way that Metroid 1 handles routing. You see, in this game there is no item collection bonus, so efficient play is actually about cutting out the parts of the level that you don't need, rather than going for 100% full map completion. So, like, your first time through, this is a really cruel trick, this is a really nasty little pitfall, but on subsequent playthroughs, you can turn the tables. You can take advantage of this trapdoor to get to Ridley really, really quickly. Who doesn't live up to the hype. What an utter piece of piss. So you have to defeat Ridley and Kraid to get access to Tourian. Now I mentioned earlier that this created a structure, and I like that structure a lot. You have a lot of freedom in how you approach the task of defeating Ridley and Kraid, but the game still builds towards a climax. I think that this funnel-shaped structure is a really good fit for this kind of game. There are only two enemies in Tourian. There's the Rinkas, bastards, and the Metroids. I love them. I fucking love them. I think it's an interesting bit of texture to name the game after these characters because they aren't like the main antagonists or anything. They're more of a plot device. I know, alien parallels. I think one of the reasons that they are so iconic is because of the way they attack. They latch onto Samus and suck out her energy. It's quite panic-inducing. Now, I think that this is a very early example of Metroid kind of leaning into horror. Because back in the day, right, it was very difficult for developers to create fear through the visuals or the sound because of the system's limitations. Instead, they had to do it through the mechanics. The Metroids introduce a mechanical tension that makes them really stand out. See, because if you take a chunk of damage, say you get hit by one of Kraid's spikes, then that tension is over almost immediately. Instead, here with the Metroids, you're frantically trying to dislodge them. It's possible to get swarmed, so you're trying to shake off 2 or 3 at once. That's even more scary. In the concept art, the Metroids have tentacles, but I really think that the mandibles the sprite uses, and that the series would just go on to use forevermore, I think that's much, much better. I think it's a much more forceful image, the idea of the Metroid having to clamp down to drain you of your energy. The way to dislodge them is, of course, to curl into a ball and use bombs. Afterwards, you can freeze them with the ice beam and then shatter them with 5 missiles. So, in order to defeat these baddies, more so than pretty much any other enemy in the game, you really have to make use of all of Samus's arsenal. This is the kind of distinction that makes these guys feel special, like a real threat. Samus Aran is the only one that can deal with them. Now, I don't think that these guys are the greatest threat in this game, or even the greatest threat down here in Tourian. I don't think that they're quite as bad as the Rinkas. But even so, I think it's really obvious why they became the series' namesake. Like, I love them a lot, man. What an awesome monster. The big baddie of the game is Mother Brain, who is, unfortunately, really clunky. I love the idea of you fighting her defense systems. The Zebetite, which is these regenerating walls, make this a battle of both skill, but also attrition. They bring the rest of the game into this boss battle. Because while you need to have the skill to weave between the hail of bullets and Rinkas, you also need to actually have the firepower to punch through these walls. The only way that you can obtain that firepower is by having explored enough of the map before you even come down here. When you do eventually breach her container and start firing missiles into the brain, you're rewarded with these ultra satisfying organic squeaks and crackles. The music down here is absolutely spot on as well. It's really showing off Tanaka's philosophy of having the music and the sound effects blend together. There's this burbling sound in the background, like a mad scientist's lair with all the beakers and test tubes filled with mysterious liquid. It's so good. Like, isn't that the perfect fit for a room with a giant brain in a jar? Like, Metroid is kind of weird and esoteric and has these unique sensibilities, but I think that it draws from very broad and very easy to understand ideas. Now, you can just mash your face off this boss fight, you can try and tank all the damage or try and screw attack some of the Rinkas, but that's kind of unreliable. The best strategy, or so I found, was to periodically stop and then freeze the Rinkas. There can only be 3 Rinkas on screen at a time, and so if you've got all 3 of them frozen, you have a good few seconds where you can just pump missiles into Mother Brain and she can't do anything about it. So again, the Ice Beam comes in handy in this final boss fight as well. It's really trying to use the whole buffalo. So this would be a great boss. Except that the game absolutely cannot handle it. Like, the slowdown is so bad, it gets to that point where some of your button presses just don't register. Like, if you've played this before, you know exactly what I mean. And if you haven't played this before, it's really difficult to describe, but you're just going to have to take my word for it. It is bad. The game goes out with a bang, though. The escape sequence is another certified Metroid classic. It's a wee bit modest in this, its very first outing, but it is such a cool idea. You finally overcome Mother Brain, the final boss, after a really tough battle of attrition, and just when you think you've won, just when you think the credits are going to roll, there's one last wee surprise: time bomb set. There's a spike of panic and excitement, there's a release from a game's worth of tension. But also, I like that the game and the world persist beyond the final boss. Samus's mission isn't done when she destroys Mother Brain, it's done when she escapes from Zebes in one piece. One Piece! It's a bit modest, like I say, but a lot of the impact is in that first reveal. Time bomb set, get out fast. And that brings us to the famous twist ending: Samus is a woman. This was born of the desire to have different endings depending on how quickly the player completed the game, a novelty for the time, if not an outright first. There is, of course, the intonation that time is important in the manual. Even the story suggests this. It's a Hail Mary, it's a last-ditch effort with a ticking clock. Metroids multiply when exposed to beta rays for 24 hours. The Famicom version even keeps track of your hours played as days. Anyway, one idea was to have Samus remove her helmet in one of the endings, and then somebody, and nobody remembers who, said it would be a shocker if Samus turned out to be a woman. That was that. There are 4 endings total. Now, I got the middle one here, so there's still some room for improvement. To get the very best ending, you have to complete the entire game, beginning to end, in under an hour. It's actually under 2 hours if you're playing the Famicom version. Alright for some, eh? Now, I don't know how this timer actually works. Like, I'm assuming that when the game slows down, the logic slows down as well, so therefore technically you should have slightly more than an hour? Right? Unfortunately, there's just no way to tell, and nobody will ever be able to find out. Now, sub 1 hour might sound impossible, but it really isn't. Like, I've been really taking my time here, both to show off the map and to give me time to yap. The map and yap. That's the name of the genre. As there is no item tally, you really can skip most of them. If you're worried about making Tourian too difficult, well, You know, that's kind of the balancing act, but also keep in mind that you get 150 missiles just for beating Ripley and Scuff. If you already have a map handy, let's say because you spent the entire first playthrough drawing one, you can cut through quite quickly. That must be so satisfying. Like, I'm a wee bit gutted that I never got to experience that for myself. It's my own fault, really. I mean, I guess that all of us are still paying for bad decisions that we made when we were 15. Now, I'm not going to earn myself any popularity points by saying this, but, and let me unpin this here, this is why I don't want to take it for granted that starting with 30 health is a bad thing in a game that is so focused on time. Now, of course, it makes getting into the game a massive pain in the arse. Like, I think that this probably contributed to more people being turned away from this game than any other decision. But at the same time, it punishes messy play with a time penalty. You have to constantly balance risk and reward. If you play too carefully, then you're going to lose a lot of time, but if you play too recklessly, you'll have to stop and farm. Now, this is why it is really important to understand where the energy tanks are, because every energy tank you collect completely restores all of your health. Now, Samus can hold a maximum of 6 energy tanks, but there are actually 8 scattered around the map. Now, here's the strategy, right? Because even if they don't upgrade her, each energy tank will completely maximize Samus's health. What that means is, if you know where they are, you can start taking some sloppy damage and even exit out of the levels without having to farm. Now you're getting it. Playing this game to a high level, or, you know, even just to my level, demands that you work around that 30 health limit. This is why I don't think it was a mistake, or an oversight, or bad game design. You know, don't get me wrong, I totally understand the problems with it, but it wasn't stupid. I think doing this kind of second run really highlights the best part of these games, the changing relationship between the player and the environment. Most of Brinstar's important items like the ice beam, bombs, a couple of energy tanks, even the Varia suit if you can make this jump, are all in the same area. You can really get everything that you need before you even leave Brinstar. Missiles and bombs are 2 of the very earliest items that you will get, and both of them blow this game wide open right from the very beginning. Now, future games would obviously start adding a lot more items. They would start adding a lot more bespoke keys and locks, you know? Different blocks that could only be destroyed by their corresponding power-up. But I do think that there is an appeal to Metroid 1's simplicity. Your reward for doing all this is Samus in a bikini. Oh Jesus, Keir Starmer's going to come after me. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of these endings, I never have been, but I do think that it is extremely important to acknowledge Metroid's pulp influences, especially at this early stage, like, especially before it had really cemented its own identity. Like, if you look through any of Metroid's influences, you will find stuff exactly like this. It's also, of course, extremely important to the series' legacy. This was one of the earliest examples of a game having multiple endings. It's remarkable what you can accomplish when you're unbelievably horny. So, alright Metroid, we'll let you away with it this time, we're not going to call the horny police quite yet, but I do want to acknowledge that I think this sows the seeds of some problems that we are going to get to much later down the line. So, just to round things off, I do want to talk a little bit about the differences between the Famicom and NES versions. I think that the Famicom version is better in quite a few ways. Firstly, and most importantly, it's a lot smoother, there's so much less slowdown. Secondly, there is some higher quality audio. The NES item fanfare, I think, is a particularly interesting example because it seems to really boost the bass and kind of omit the melody. The jingle in the Famicom version sounds a lot closer to the one that the series would go on to use. Yeah, I know, not in Zero Mission, but you know, we'll get to Zero Mission when we get to Zero Mission, alright? Well, you lot around, it's more like Zero O Mission. Where the fuck did that come from? That was a great joke! The escape sequence, though, is really elevated by this one phrase that is included in the NES version. Without it, the Famicom version just sounds a little bit more dour, when I do think that this is supposed to be a little bit more triumphant than that, a wee bit more exciting and exhilarating. The enemy patterns in the Famicom version are more complex. They are truly random rather than pattern-based. Ridley comes a lot closer to being an actual boss. Now, there are some loading times between areas, and you can't play as Samus outside of the suit, but it is unquestionably worth it, in my opinion. The Famicom version, then, really is the way that I would recommend you play this game. It's not exactly text-heavy, so long as you understand that this says something like, "Holy fuck, it's a bomb," you'll be okay. The credits also name one Toryu Mako Benkei. Now, this isn't actually a guy. They just combined the names of 3 restaurants, Toryu, Sometime Mako, and Benkei Dining. The story goes that R&D1 ordered so much takeout while they were making Metroid that they decided to credit the 3 restaurants in the game. It is now a life's goal of mine to go and visit Sometime Mako, the only one of those 3 restaurants that's still left standing. Who's with me? Who's coming? Big Metroid fanboy field trip. I said that as a joke, but that actually sounds kinda mint. So, Metroid is both really, really important, and it's a complete mess. Both of these things are true at the same time. It's rough, it's interesting, it feels very different to a lot of the later games, and not necessarily in a bad way. Except, of course, for all of the bad ways. Every time I go back to one of these really old games, I always think there's so much to learn from this raw material. Like, you break this series down into its component parts, and you can kind of begin to see the road not travelled. There exists a universe out there where Metroid went in a kind of different direction, one that was less focused on completion and more focused on speedrunning. I'm not necessarily saying that that would have been better, but if you're out there and you're a game designer and you're looking for a different perspective on this genre, then, you know, maybe that's something to look at. But I don't think that's the popular view of this game. I think that a lot of retrospective coverage comes from the series' pedigree, you know? You want to see where it all started. But I also think that the very existence of that series makes it difficult to see this game in context. Innovations that stand on Metroid's shoulders seem really obvious in retrospect. You go away and you play Super Metroid, then you come back and you go, why isn't this one like that? A typical conclusion would look something like this. You can see the potential if only it weren't so clunky. But that's a trap. I would argue that that is the wrong conclusion to reach, because with one tiny, minuscule wee shift in perspective, you now completely understand this game. You don't get the potential without that clunk. The good and the bad of this game both come from exactly the same place. It pioneered an entire style of play explicitly because of its troubled development. All of its most iconic ideas came from the rush to get it done. Personally, I'm really glad we've got that clunk. I'm really glad we've got these problems. Or, at the very least, I'm completely willing to put up with the problems. Because it means that we get to see what happens next. And what happens next is something truly special. Alright, sign off time. Thank you very much for watching. Big thank you to the subscribers, thank you for sticking around. Extra specially big thank you to the patrons, some of whose names are scrolling across the screen right now. They have been utterly fantastic, especially lately. Getting this video done has been an absolute fucking nightmare. This is actually the second time I'm having to finish it, because the first time I finished it, I got it all done, and then OneDrive completely wiped my hard drive. Good going, Microsoft.